is Leah Briick, Executive Director of SASH. Here I am again for another conversation from the couch. Today we're talking with Brian Vaughan, who is the chair of our membership committee, but Brian's had a really important role in leading our current conversations with spiritual leaders. We've had 2 discussions already. We've got another one coming. And so I thought, why not have Brian on today to talk about those 2 dates that we got together with 9 spiritual leaders each time, right, Brian?
Yes.
And talk about some issues related to spiritual leaders. So welcome, Brian. So glad you could join me today.
I'm glad to be here, Leah. I'm so grateful for this opportunity and plus your suggestion that this be done.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background, Brian. How did you get into this whole discussion with spiritual leaders and what we're doing right now?
Well, I have, through the years, continued to be a person of faith, seeking how God is me and other people in their lives and wanting to be a guide to them. That comes out of my years, one time back in the 90s or 80s and 90s as a Roman Catholic priest in the Archdiocese of Washington. Many people ask, well, why'd you leave, Brian? Well, I left to give myself the opportunity of getting married someday. And that eventually happened. And then around that time is when I started to pursue this career in sexual health, regarding sexual compulsivity, along with helping people just have a more fuller life, especially with regard to their spiritual journey. So that's a very, very significant part of my journey as far as that's concerned. So I live in Fredericksburg, Virginia, with my wife, Jennifer. We've been married for 15 years, and I currently work at a practice called Riverside Counseling, which is again in Fredericksburg, Virginia.
All right. Well, it sounds like you're a perfect leader for our discussion with the spiritual leaders that we've been inviting. You know, I think it really is really important to mention for our audience why we should even be talking to spiritual leaders about sexual health. You know, what is the value in having that discussion?
Well, in my years as a priest, I would say probably a large percentage of folks would approach me with regard to sexual behavior having to do with whether or not they were, quote, sinning or not. And people had a lot of guilt and anxiety about that. And so I felt fairly comfortable in talking with people about this, but there were other subjects that I saw sometimes, or areas I should say, that people did feel some discomfort, or I did feel some discomfort. And so here, all these years later, I just thought it was really important to then help spiritual leaders when their faith members approach them with issues regarding sexuality. Because often a faith leader, regardless of what tradition or background or denomination, will be one of the first persons or individuals that someone may approach for a whole variety of reasons. First of all, comfort, and also in most cases, it's free. So that's one of my interests, or one of my 2 primary interests in helping faith leaders do this kind of work.
That they're going to go to somebody that they trust, especially as it relates to those kinds of issues where you're unsure. And if you're talking about infidelity or even pornography use, or any of those kinds of issues where your faith is intersecting with your sexual health, that could, I'm sure, be very confusing for people who don't know what to do. And so they're going to go to their pastor and say, you know, what do I do about this, before they might go to see a counselor. You know, why would a faith leader need help with these kinds of discussions, I think is one of the questions that always arises for me is how can we help a faith leader, but why do they need help with these kinds of discussions?
Well, before I respond to that question, I just wanted to say something that regarding why they would, in the first place, approach someone in addition to comfort level and also no cost. But in most cases, the person feels almost 100% the surety of confidentiality or anonymity. So it's not going to be repeated. And in the Roman Catholic tradition, we understood this as the seal of confession. But I know many of my Protestant brothers and sisters who are in this role, along with other faith leaders in the Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist or any other tradition, for the most part, they can be assured that if they would share something with their faith leader, it would be confidential. So getting back to your question from a moment ago, it's important for the faith leader to then have a certain comfort level in himself or herself to be able to address these issues, because we're all sexual beings. We all have our own sexual past. We may even have some baggage. We may even have our own shame. And for us to have worked through some of that is very important. But sometimes just as simple as when someone does ask about pornography or masturbation or infidelity, there can be that initial surprise that a faith leader may have, and he or she needs to be able to call upon their own experience, but also their own knowledge in how to address this issue with someone. So that's very, very important that they're aware of their own issues, but then have some basic working knowledge. For example, someone approaches a clergy person about pornography. So first and foremost, the person just needs to be able to affirm the person, don't shame them, thank them for being open and honest about this. And then what are the resources that someone can go to? For example, I just recently got a referral from someone who said a local pastor in my area knew of me, and he sent that person to me. So again, so the comfort level, knowledge, and also awareness of who are the resource people in a given area. So that's 3 reasons why I can think that faith leaders need to feel some comfort and feel confident, and also have a basic knowledge of what's in their area to help the faith member when that person has approached him or her.
I can really relate to the comfort level, because obviously sexual health is not something that we don't talk about it generally, just having that discussion in our everyday lives with our friends, or maybe even with our partners, let alone going to our faith leaders about our sexual health and what's happening in our sexual health journey. So it could be, my assumption is it could be quite an astounding kind of conversation that you're walking into your faith leader to talk about something that's happening in your coupleship, and that faith leader has no resources or not even the language to have this discussion with the people that they're serving. So it's really valuable.
Yes, it is. And again, it's just a basic knowledge and capacity to be conversational with someone on this. I mean, kind of the classic example is the awkwardness that the clergy person might have. That very well could be, but as long as he or she can then say, okay, these are some possible ways that you can go seek help on this. And even in the Episcopal tradition now, a parishioner can approach their rector or associate rector and have as many as 6 sessions together with someone. That associate rector or rector can have a basic knowledge and comfort level in being able to discuss this with them. I say Episcopal because that happens to be the faith tradition that I am now.
Well, that sounds like a whole other discussion about when does a faith leader have to be careful about crossing the line into counseling and really knowing what their own limitations are. I think that's also something that has to be brought forward with the faith leaders. But you know, I can't help but think that if I'm going to talk to my pastor, for say, like in my faith, going to talk to my pastor about something that's happening in my own sexual life, and that maybe they have their own issues that they're dealing with that are they're keeping hidden from people that are in their faith community. What do you do with that?
Well, my experience with that has been if someone is having a struggle himself or herself, and he or she is not getting help with this. This is painting a broad stroke there, but sometimes what they might do, which can be potentially harmful for the faith community member, they may say, "Oh yeah, I can talk with you about that, no problem," and there can be issues that then arise as a result of that. So my experience is that when someone has really done a lot of reflection on this and looked at his or her life, they can clearly see, well, there's some issues about sexuality I could talk about, and there's others I cannot talk about for a variety of reasons. So it's really very important to have boundaries as far as what one can deal with and what one can't deal with, or maybe in some cases will not, particularly if that's been a past trauma having to do with any type of sexual abuse that the faith leader has experienced.
Well, it's going to be important that they deal with their own shame, though, too, isn't it? I mean, we want to make sure that these folks get into their own recovery if they're dealing with their own issues, and so providing them with the resources for their own struggles. And how do I deal with the shame of exposing this, and what does this mean for me in the church? How do I move forward? Am I going to share this with my congregants? You know, there's a whole ramification of a sort of a domino effect, if you will, when you start talking about your own issues.
Yeah, and what comes to mind is years ago when I was with the archdiocese, there was a priest who was the go-to for alcoholism. By this time, it was the 1980s, and a lot of the shame that was connected with it wasn't so much prominent or prevalent back then. However, I think with issues of sexuality, um, any clergy or faith leader that's dealing with any type of compulsive behavior, particularly that has anything to do with pornography or any other type of issue of sexual compulsivity, usually they're best to be very circumspect about that and not necessarily talk with anyone about that, particularly on any given day that the community gathers, so Saturday, Friday evening, or Sunday. However, it's very important for the clergy persons to still have a situation and a context, a group, possibly a 12-step group that's composed of other faith leaders who share in this, and they gather again in a very, very confidential way. I'm aware of a number of groups like that where people who are professionals and or faith leaders gather together. In many cases, they use a 12-step model. But in general, it's not something that's shared in general in the community for all the reasons that we're well aware of these days.
Right. And the spiritual leader, I would assume, has to be very careful about their own public disclosure. You know, when you share this kind of information, you mentioned alcohol and the stigma with alcohol. Well, and I can't say that we're past that, but we're certainly in a different period than we were, 35 years ago when I got sober. There was some stigma still, but today it's very much accepted. But if you're thinking about or talking about a sexual health addiction, when you're talking about sex addiction, pornography addiction, any kind of infidelity, that has a whole other stigma around it. And the just what people believe and think, and all of the issues that come out around that, right?
Yes, and again, that's why it's very important for any faith leader, regardless of background or tradition, to be very careful in that, because once that gets out and people react to that, it can cause a lot of unintended harm with that. So many people who are faith leaders, in my experience, who have an issue with sexual health or sexual compulsive behavior, they're still very private and confidential about that.
Brian, let's talk for a few minutes about where we're going with the conversations with spiritual leaders and SASH's vision. I mentioned that we've already had 2 conversations. And so I think it's important to say that both of those are on YouTube right now. People can have access to those. They are a little long. They're about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So get a snack and spend some time watching those. But there's some really great points that have come out of both of those conversations. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, both have been incredibly exciting and enriching. In both videos, they have had that experience, as I see it, where we got folks together, and what came out of it was, in both cases, so much bigger, so much more exciting, so much more enriching than what we thought would come about. And the wide perspectives on a variety of issues that we've just been covering has been quite interesting and intriguing and informative, and I think inspiring, and also hope-giving as far as the directions that we have been going.
So I would assume, and I think that you would agree that these are great resources for a congregant or even a faith leader to take that little nugget of conversation and listen to it, maybe share it and have a discussion with, maybe in a small group. They could use some of those talking points that we've brought up. Where are we going with this? We have some plans as a community, a SASH community, with these conversations. Let's talk a little bit about where we're going.
So I'm going to just briefly call upon my experience when I was with the DC diocese. So a lot of dioceses, and it's probably the same in almost all traditions. Typically, the faith leaders get together on a regular basis. So I could see these videos as points of conversation and discussion with one another, in which from there maybe further insight and understanding occurs. Plus, these are some plans of actions that we could do. So the next step, getting into that, our next video is planned for January 25th, 2022. It's going to be in the afternoon, and it's going to be live as the second one was. So we're really hoping more people will actually log on and join us on YouTube. But the next one is going to be looking at an issue that's very relevant and prevalent these days. It's probably come about as a result of, I think, ultimately the awareness that was raised in the Roman Catholic Church as far as clergy sexual abuse, but then more recently in the Southern Baptist Conference as far as mistreatment and disrespect and sexual abuse of women. But the undergirding piece with that is the awareness or the reality of the patriarchal template that I think is underneath many faith traditions. So many people grew up with an understanding that God is a male. Jesus obviously was a male. The Holy Spirit maybe has more of an amorphous, maybe more of a female quality. But fundamentally it's a male. And only in the last 50 to 100 years have many traditions, with the exception of the Roman Catholic Church and several others, allowed clergy to be women. And so the structure is again focused on how the patriarchy essentially, well, to put it very informally, calls the shots and determines what's going to happen. And voices of women, particularly, are not heard, particularly women of color and other minority people. But my goodness, in the Roman Catholic Church, again, the nuns have been the ones who have been speaking for a long, long time, and they've done many, many great things. But again, their voices aren't heard. So what we want to look at on January 25th is that simple reality. And then secondly, how it can be discussed in faith communities to further bring about awareness, and what are some beginnings of concrete steps that can be made to further address this. One very basic one is more and more men such as myself to simply say that this is a reality. There's still many people that really struggle with this and say, well, no, it really isn't, or that's just the way that it is. God ordained that. But more and more women have been speaking up the last 15 or 20 years to say, no, that's not the case. There is a both male and female quality to God. Many people even believe that God doesn't really have a gender per se at all. So that's some of the topics and points that we're going to be talking on in January 25th.
That's a really, really big topic. Clearly, we are not going to solve any problems in that couple-hour discussion. But as you said, we will be bringing voice to the problem as it is occurring, and looking at, how can we as a global community, but also how can we as SASH help to change things, and what can we do? What are some of the paths that we can go down? In the second video, I want to briefly mention that we came up with a list of things that we could do throughout this discussion to further it. And so just to tell our audience that we will be working on some of these things over time, and to just watch for them, stay tuned with us and really be present, because we're going to be doing a lot of great things. And if you want to register for the January 25th session, we hope that you will. You can go on the SASH website. It's right there under free videos, and there's a link where you can register for that. So we hope that you will join us for that live discussion. Bring some questions. We really need you, and we need people in this community to help us make some change.
Yes, very much so. We invite you to come.
So thank you so much for being with us today, Brian, and really just giving us some more information about the Conversations with Spiritual Leaders and what's happening in that very important series that we're doing. And I thank you for leading that for us. It's such a valiant effort that you're doing, and I'm very appreciative of your time.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm appreciative of your leadership too. So yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, we will see you soon. We'll see you on the 25th.